This video is sponsored by FanHome, offering high-end models and figurines. They have a new model, and this is the Millennium Falcon from the classic Star Wars movies. And this is a high-end model with many detailed parts. And you can start this today. As little as $1.95 can get you started. And this is what is sent to you. Everything you need to begin to build the Millennium Falcon. And so also comes with detailed magazines that talk about the history of the Falcon, as well as a step-by-step basis on how to assemble it. It's very detailed. You just follow the instructions, and before you know it, you will have assembled the iconic ship from Star Wars, and you will have a magnificent collectible item for your game room. The link to FanHome is below, where you can start building your high-end models today. Many of you know that I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and in today's video, I'm taking a look at forgotten ports and games that kind of get overlooked that are in the Star Wars universe. You know, these are Star Wars games. These aren't 10 out of 10 games. These are games that are just a little uncommon or forgotten or just years past. You know, these games just have not aged as great as some others, but I recommend going back and playing some of these. You may want to check them out. Here we go. First up is Star Wars for the Sega Master System. And you would think such an iconic title, a lot of people know about this. Actually, not really, especially here in the States, as you know, this was developed, I do believe, by Beam Software, which then ported it to the Game Gear as well. And the Game Gear version got into North America, but a lot of people remember playing only the NES version, which technically is inferior to this version. This version, which came out in 1993, fixed some issues that the NES version had. It has better graphics. It's a little bit more easier. It's less difficult. There's two different difficulty modes to play this. I think this is the better version of an average game. I would say, you know, the NES version of Star Wars is okay. It has some issues. But you know what? This is a comprehensive game, which is a wonderful platformer with some other aspects thrown into it. But you know what? It's far from perfect, and it came out 30 years ago. But you may want to check it out. And I know people overseas are more familiar with this, but I do think it's a good game. Next up is Episode 1 Racer for Game Boy Color. Now, I don't know about you, but I remember growing up and playing the N64 version. A lot of people also played the PC version as well as Dreamcast. But there was a scaled down, totally different game made for Game Boy Color. And this is a top-down perspective. And you know what? It had a rumble feature built into the original cartridge. You know, and this is kind of an oddity. Now, if you had a Game Boy Color, this was a pretty popular title. But for people, again, that, you know, didn't grow up with this or didn't know about it, yes, there was a version of Racer for the Game Boy Color, and it plays pretty good. You know, considering the hardware limitations, it was a totally different game. I like the color. I like the speed aspect. I found myself enjoying this one, understanding that it is a limitation of hardware. But for a racing game on Game Boy Color, I found myself enjoying this one, and you might have grown up with this or maybe not, but that's why I'm putting it on this list. There's so many games that get discounted because they're connected to the prequel trilogy. Another one, Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith for the Game Boy Advance. And the reason why this makes the list is that it got diluted with all the games that were coming out on Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS at the time of release. There was so many Star Wars games coming out, and they were different. Many of them were different than their console older brothers. And so it's a very different game. It's a side-scrolling slasher-style game with lots of things you can collect. There's boss fights, well-done animation. I like the graphics. You know, there's lots to like about this, but I think it gets overlooked just because of the sheer volume of other games that came out. And so if you're looking for this game, you may want to check it out. You definitely have to look it up and be careful on the title, because there was lots of different games coming out at the time connected to the prequel trilogies, especially for handhelds. And so this is one of the better ones, I think, and it definitely makes my list because I wasn't fully clear on its release. and I enjoyed going back and playing it myself. Next one is going old school with Atari 2600, and this is Star Wars Return of the Jedi Death Star Battle. And this kind of gets overlooked because it was a fairly late release for Atari. I think a lot of people remember growing up with Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, and by the time this came out, people had moved on from the Atari 2600. I do think it's a great game. I do enjoy playing this. It's got simple gameplay mechanics. First, you have to get through like a force field, taking out ships, and then you're taking out the Death Star, trying to get to its core. And you know what? I really like what they've done here. The more I've played this, the more I enjoy it. Now, I covered this on a special Return of the Jedi 40th edition. I covered lots of games connected to Return of the Jedi. But yeah, this is a fun one, and you may want to go back and revisit it, as I found myself really liking this one. In fact, I like this more than Empire Strikes Back, which gets all the popularity for the 2600 game. But yeah, I think this might be a better game, and many people do not know about it. Next up is a 3D platformer, Star Wars Lethal Alliance, and this was made for the DS and PSP. Really showing it on the DS here because it's easier to show on emulation. But you know what? I enjoyed this game. Now, this is not a perfect game. You know, this gets probably like a 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10. The control scheme's a little bit different on the PSP. Graphics better. But you know what? I went back to this and it was a lot better than I initially thought. And you know what? I agree with the reviews. The DS could do 3D, and for some games it looks pretty good. Other games a little rough. This one's all right. Physical copies, especially for the DS, will not set you back too bad. And prices vary all the time, so that's gonna vary with the time that you're watching this video. But you know what? If you're looking for something a little different, maybe you're wanting to experience a new Star Wars adventure, you may want to check this one out, as it gets my thumbs up. Another game that kind of gets lost in the shuffle with all the handheld releases back in the day. Next up is kind of an oddity, Star Wars Demolition, and this could fit into a couple different categories. And essentially, it's a vehicular combat game using Star Wars characters. And so I found this one enjoyable, especially if you're a big Star Wars fan. I've wanted to mention this game before, and I really haven't. There also was a Dreamcast version, which looks a little bit better on the eyes. This is the PlayStation version I'm showing. But yeah, you go around a different planet for missions, and there's a couple different modes you can check out. And you know what? It's kind of fun. And is it perfect? No. There's so many games back in the day that they're coming out, such as Twisted Metal and Vigilante 8. For a while there was just vehicle combat games were all the rage. And so it seemed like everybody wanted to make their own version of it, as they sold well. But you know what? This is kind of above average, not perfect. I would say like another 7 out of 10 game. And so if you go into it with that, and especially if you haven't played it before, I think you're going to find a lot of enjoyable things here. Another game that, if you go PlayStation route at least, it's not going to set you back too bad. Now this final one is a favorite of mine of this list, and this is Star Wars Battle for Naboo. Now, for whatever reason, it came out in 2001. It came out way after the movie was released. It is connected to the prequel trilogy, but Factor 5 did an amazing job here. This is kind of a well-overlooked game. It was also on PC as well. And so it takes the fun of Rogue Squadron, which is one of my favorite N64 games of all time, and sets it in, the Episode 1 Star Wars universe. And so there's lots of different, made-up levels and characters. But you know what? I enjoyed playing this. I think the story's kind of funny, and the voice work is kind of funny and hilarious as well. But if you liked Rogue Squadron and you haven't played this, you may want to check it out. Lots of different hidden secrets in this game. I enjoyed playing this. I'm a big Factor 5 fan of their games, and I found myself, these are the types of games that I really enjoyed going back and playing on the N64. It was a late release, and so it makes the list because of that late release. A lot of people by 2001 had moved on from the N64 onto other consoles. And you know what? I don't blame people, but you want to go back and play this, you're in for a treat. I have not played the PC version, but I'm sure it looks a lot better. But these are the games I recommend if you're Star Wars fans. You may want to go back and revisit. So, of the games I've shown today, have you played any of these? What are your thoughts? Do you own any of these? Play them in emulation? Anyways, thank you for coming to my channel. If you like what you see, consider hitting that like and subscribe button and clicking the bell as I'm uploading videos every week. You folks are wonderful and beautiful. This is the Immortal John Hancock, and you take care.